You are listening to a Sustainable World Radio podcast. Sustainable World Radio brings you in-depth interviews, news, and commentary about positive solutions to environmental challenges. Solutions that adhere to the permaculture ethics of earth care, people care, fair share. Are you interested in learning more about permaculture projects around the globe? How to plant a food forest? Restorative design or ethnobotany? Then stay tuned for Sustainable World Radio. I'm your host and producer, Jill Cloutier. Welcome, Michael Judd, to Sustainable World Radio.
Right on. Thank you.
I'm so glad to have you here. I finished your book, Edible Landscaping with a Permaculture Twist, How to Have Your Yard and Eat It Too, in this weekend, actually. I started it a few days before and just loved it. It's very humorous, enthusiastic, and has a lot of information in it. So thank you for your book. It's great.
Thanks. Yeah, it was fun. It was fun to do. It was kind of a natural evolution just from our hands-on workshops. You know, we were doing a lot of these projects. And afterwards, people were like, well, do you have any follow-up on this? You know, how do I take this home now? And so that's kind of naturally born of that and why it follows, you know, a real ABC, how to do, you know, each project.
In your introduction, you say that your book is meant to be carried out into the landscape, propped open with a rock, dog-eared, penciled in, smudged with dirty fingers, and pelted by the occasional rain. So I love that. This one definitely is going to be brought out into our garden because you give really detailed and very easy to follow instructions on a lot of really cool projects we'll be talking about in this podcast. So let's get started. In the introduction, you say that edible landscaping is the new American garden. Can you tell our listeners why you believe that to be true?
I kind of boosted that term, the new American garden, from some of the pioneers of our modern landscaping back in the 50s and 60s, like Kurt Blumel and those guys. But I feel like it works in a new way with the new challenges that we have. I mean, most of America where folks are living is suburbia. And we have these combined challenges of lack of really tasty food, nutritious food, and safe food, as well as the challenge of all this runoff. You know, how do we deal with some of the toxins? How do we deal with all this excess water? And then, of course, then there's the aesthetics. You know, it has to look good. It's got to fit in with your HOA, with your neighbors. So, and edible landscaping can do all of that together. It's like form, function, and production. So I think it's, in essence, it is this renaissance of landscaping. You know, it is the new American garden. I mean, not just be American, you know, I mean, these are patterns that we're finding all over the planet as suburbia grows, as food supplies cheapen in every way. So, and it's so flexible, you know, and it can be really good looking. It can even be sexy, you know, it can be all the things that you want it to be. And it's very adaptable, like permaculture as well. I mean, you can even say permaculture, you know, except for it's broader than just gardening. But, you know, permaculture is the new American garden because it can encompass so many things that we need.
Can you share with listeners who may not be aware of, I know I have a lot of listeners who know what permaculture is, but what's your definition of permaculture? I just had to throw that in.
To me, permaculture is about designing holistic human habitats. That includes much more than just gardening. It's looking at all the resources. It's your buildings, it's your energy sources, it's your social relations, it's your economics. It's how to design all of those into your life and your landscape.
Michael, one thing I noticed too in your book, in the end, you tell your story just a bit about how you were you in Mexico, I believe? And can you tell our listeners just a little bit about that, about your journey and how you became aware of the indigenous way of looking at the world, at the ecosystem and permaculture?
I was very fortunate to go and live in the last stretch of the Lackawanna jungle, which stretches the border of Chiapas and Guatemala along the Usumacinta River. This is the last little patch of jungle down there where the conquistadores, the Spanish, the Christians did not get into, and where the last of the Mayans retreated to. And 100 years ago, they were down to 100 Lacandon Mayans that still spoke their own language. It still had all their own traditions of land use, shamanism, and they're in the center of this ever decreasing patch of jungle that's being increased upon. I was fortunate enough to run into one of these Mayans who had come out of the jungle, and he was looking for help. He was having troubles with parasites and stomach problems, and I was fortunate enough to meet him and do a bunch of sign language with him, trying to figure out what was going on, and deducted that they were being exposed more and more to parasitic cycles because the jungle was decreasing, and where they'd traditionally lived spaced out as a community, now they were living in a tighter quarters. That cycle of parasites was going much quicker, and dogs were coming into the jungle, and the cycle was spreading to the children. So he was out looking for help. And I said, well, I might have something that could help. I was thinking of a compost toilet. I was thinking of a way to help contain the humanure. And he was reticent, because they don't allow outsiders in. But I really encouraged him, and we went back into the jungle. Went about 4 days up an old dry riverbed into the heart of the jungle, into his community. I met with the elders of the community and did some drawings and some conceptualizing, just the simple idea of containing in a compost toilet your waste. They went for it, and they said, but we're going to build it from the jungle. We're going to build it in our way. So I got to learn, natural building right off the bat, by going out and harvesting the palm, harvesting the bamboo, making up our own adobe. While I was doing that, I was living in this community and watching how they interacted with their landscape, the jungle around them. And they'd lived there now for who knows, thousands of years. And they had not ruined it. They were able to keep working that land regeneratively. And it's kept supplying all of their food, their fibers, their fodders, their medicines, things for their crafts. And it just produced. And I was just amazed that, this is possible. It sunk into me that as humans, we can do this and have, community and have the land around us keep supporting us. And that changed my life, just by knowing it was possible, not reading about it, not sort of pontificating about it, but like living it. And then I got wiped out. I got sick. With everything I went in there to try and help eradicate, salmonella, amoebas, typhoid. I got it all at once. And I was pretty much carried out of the jungle. But, that too shaped my life, because I had to figure out how to heal myself. And that led me to growing food. And the source of actual healing was coming out of the plants, was working with the earth. And I started doing biodynamics and just started hungry for learning and healing. And that also led me to permaculture, because I came back to the States to begin, regenerating myself. I was really excited about natural building, because I just, built this awesome compost toilet out of the jungle. The thing was beautiful. I wanted to live in it. It was a beautiful structure. I heard about a straw bale building being built at Earth Haven down outside of Asheville. Earth Haven, I think, is purportedly the first North American designed permaculture community. It's 300 plus acres in the mountains there. And it's designed for like 120 some people to live on. And it's a living permaculture manual. It's pretty fantastic when I arrived. And, this was, 17 years ago. They were building this circular straw bale community center. And when I arrived, I just jumped in on stacking bales and I didn't know anything about permaculture. And by being there at that time, sort of the genesis of it being developed with some of the most amazing teachers like Chuck Marsh and Peter Bain, Patricia Allison, all of these incredible permaculture pioneers for North America were there. I just fell right into, the cradle of permaculture after coming from living with the Mayans. It was fantastic to see how they were using indigenous knowledge and applying it to modern realities, modern economy, modern, sociology, I mean, how they did consensus and all these things were just, were blowing me away and plugging me in at the same time. I went from it in rural Latin America to here in North America. And, that's been the pattern of my life since then. I've been back and forth to Latin America and the States, and I've been learning permaculture here and applying that in Latin America, bringing back those indigenous and rural skills of Latin America and sharing them here, adding them to permaculture and what I do. And it's just been this great sort of cross-pollination that's, blossomed and has been born in Project Bona Fide, nonprofit I started 13 years ago in rural Nicaragua.
Tell us about Project Bona Fide and how we kind of know what inspired it, it sounds like. Tell us what you're doing in Nicaragua. And I loved in your book, you said you started in Nicaragua armed only with a machete, idealism, and a pocket full of raised money. So tell us about that.
Yeah, that is the way it began. I had been reading stories in the New York Times about people going hungry in Nicaragua. And this was after living with the indigenous peoples and learning about permaculture. I was just amazed, frustrated, and confused why a place so fertile as Nicaragua would be going through, challenges of drought and hunger. And guided me into really understanding, global land use and cash cropping and all that goes with that. I felt like, hey, I've got some tools, I've seen this work. I'm going to go down there and and see what can be planted, what can be created, mixing indigenous knowledge, permaculture, and the local knowledge. And that's kind of what and how Project Bona Fide started. Very grassroots, living with and in the community down there. Listening to them, learning from them, and sort of grafting all that into food forest design, and really kind of exploring, what kind of foods would actually be of interest to the local culture and to the budding markets around tourism and whatnot. Really using permaculture in the sense of, observing what was going on, looking for what was doing well, accessing all the available resources, and then just creatively combining them into ways that created first food security. So first, having more perennial crops for food backup. Secondly, those perennial crops creating, value-added markets, because here you're starting to get fruits off season. You've brought jackfruit in. Jackfruit's producing, throughout the drought and throughout the different times of year. So you have a new market. So that's going to create new income, which is going to up the value of your land, which is going to prevent you from selling your land and migrating. So it really holds the culture together through its ecology and being realistic about what's going to make some money, through these crops, not just get on, the soapbox and say, hey, it's really going to help you guys if you plant more perennials and stop using herbicides. You've got to show how this is going to make more money by the end of the day. And, so it's almost manipulation of ecology for economy so that it comes back to feeding the ecology, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm, that makes total sense. And, reading in your book, you have tree nurseries, you're collecting fruit, nuts, edible palms, perennial greens, and that you actually have one of the where is it? Oh, you have one of the most diverse collections of plant genetics in the region, which is amazing. Yes. Bilingual permaculture courses, community-focused nutrition programs. So it's not only sustainable for the land, that term sustainable, but it's also for the people there as well.
Very much. And I got to give credit to Chris Shanks, who I've co-directed the project with for about 11 years now. He's a real plant ninja.
Is he the pawpaw eater that's mentioned in your book? Yeah.
He is the pawpaw eater. Any fruit. He's got an amazing belly. He's got a high sugar belly tolerance. I
know you said, I think in the section on, is it pawpaws? You said, yes, Chris actually made it to the end eating his way through or something like that. It was really funny.
Pawpaw orchard. It was impressive. But yeah, Chris is down there living, running the project, running the courses, really collecting a lot of diversity, experimenting, seeing what's growing well, working a lot with bamboos and, all different types of species that are, really finding a niche culturally. As well as ecologically down there. It's an awesome place. I really encourage people, to check it out, projectbonafide.com. We have internships, volunteers, go for a course. It's a fast track to learning because you go to the tropics and we're on volcanoes there. So the soil is rich and you've got this warm, humid climate. Things grow so fast. You can learn so fast. Compared to up here in the temperate zone, you mess up one year and you're like, oh, okay, you got to wait the whole next year to try, to improve it again. Down there, you mess up, okay, chop it down, stick it back in the ground, and it starts growing again. You can almost chop any limb off, stick it in the ground, you got a new tree.
Yeah.
And you can learn to graft quickly. So that's how I really sort of shot forward with my learning.
We'll mention your contact information at the end, but if someone's listening and just totally fired up and wants to go to Nicaragua and look at this, your beautiful project there, what's your contact information and website?
Well, projectbonafide.com is where you should begin. And there's a section there for volunteers and interns, and email the coordinator down there. And, there's also courses throughout the year you might be interested in, and you could sign up. But really go to projectbonafide.com, and that's a great start to getting down there. And it's a really great, interesting community of international people, locals. I mean, and it's real grassroots. A lot of people that come there actually make a difference. You actually get involved in doing something where you can make something happen.
That's great. That's very inspiring for a lot of people. I think people are looking for that in their life where they can actually have a direct impact on something in a beneficial way, positive way.
Yeah.
Good work, Michael. So we're going to follow your life and we're going to go from Nicaragua to talking about some of the projects that are in your book. I love the illustrations and the instructions, and I'd love to talk about just a few of those projects in depth. Things that people can do at home to empower them and to turn their lawn or landscape into an edible oasis. And the first one in your book that I'd love to talk about are herb spirals.
Herb spirals, I call them sort of edible architecture. Because they look good all the time, year round. It's one of the benefits. A lot of times, especially in the north here, you grow something in the wintertime, it's either cut back or it's a twig. This kind of falls into the category of some really interesting architecture on your landscape with lots of function as well. And basically, it's a pile of stones, which have many benefits. Now, I outline in the book two different styles of building herb spirals. One that is a dry stack, meaning you will build your spiral with all the stones at one go. And this is usually much easier to do with, square cut, wall stone, granite blocks, bricks, things like that, where you're going to build it so it's freestanding completely. And then what you do is you infill that with soil. And that design is really good when you have a tight space. Maybe it's a public space. You really want to make sure it's going to kind of stay, where you've put it, and pretty much stay looking the way that you've built it. The downside to that is you don't have as much soil in there. You've only got sort of the cavities between the stones you've created. And that limits it more to using Mediterranean drought-tolerant herbs. I build those for restaurants and places where I want to, really tuck them into a corner or, have a tight-fitting space, and I know they're going to stay there. Now, the other design, which is much easier and takes really no stone stacking skills, is what I call a freeform herb spiral. And that's where you either mix up your own soil and compost mix, maybe 70% soil, 30% compost, or have a local landscape supplier mix it up, which is what I usually do because I make these pretty big. In the book, I outlined one that's about 12 feet across in diameter, and it's about 6 yards of mixed compost and soil. What I do is I have that ideally dropped right where I'm going to build the spiral. If you can't, you can wheelbarrow it and drop it right there. And then I shape that pile into a spiral first. I shape it with a rake, to get it where I want it. And then I quite simply just start stacking the stones around the shape that I've cut out. So the stones at the very top are just sitting on top of the soil. They're not going all the way down to the ground. So basically you have this huge mass really nice draining soil. So, and then you put this around. The upside of this is you've got a lot of soil, loose soil for your roots to run into, and a lot more drought resistance. The downside is that it can shift and move on you. I've actually found that to only add character and, never to, really made it look unattractive. And another upside to the freeform herb spirals, you can use round stone. You can use, your neighbor's wall stone. Anything you can find, you can really stack it up and lean it kind of into the spiral, into the shaped soil. So it's very forgiving. Herb spirals also create year-round beneficial insect habitat. Not just beneficial insects, but it's good habitat for lizards and all these other beneficial critters, I should say, that are really going to come out and help balance your insect ecology throughout the year. So I really encourage people to create habitat as much as they can, and the herb spirals really have multiple functions in that. And they really help create a balanced microclimate. So they start up early because of all that stone. It gathers the early heat in the spring and gets you a head start. And then it holds it and carries it deep into the fall and into the winter, really extending your season for a lot of herbs and plants. And a lot of herbs, like we're here in Zone 7 in Maryland, rosemary's hit or miss, a few of these thymes and sages, but in the herb spirals, they almost all overwinter and just come right back and flourish the next year. So you will really see a marked difference in the health of your plants. In general, things just thrive in the spirals.
Oh, that's great. And they're beautiful too.
Yes, they are. They are beautiful. They create that architecture, that focal point.
And this was the first, your book was the first permaculture gardening book I've read that actually had recipes as well for cocktails made with homegrown produce, which I loved. And I brought that up now because for the Tom Collins recipe, it says, sip and contemplate the magnificence of your herb spiral. So I love that image of sitting there in your yard, gazing at your herb spiral and sipping your homemade Tom Collins cocktail. Can you tell our listeners why you chose to include these recipes for cocktails and went into that world of botany and booze, which I thought was really fun?
I'll try to do this without sounding like an alcoholic. One of the stimuluses for doing that was I find that people get really excited in the spring about their gardens, about planting, and they put a lot of energy into it, and they go out and they plant these fabulous plants. And then come summer, the heat's kicking up, they're thinking about going to the beach or hanging out in the hammock, all that food is beginning to produce. And I think harvesting is over romanticized. It's a lot of work, to go out there and harvest, pick your vegetables, pick your fruits, bring them inside, clean them, turn them into something. And I'm thinking, okay, it's summertime. What's going to get people out there, to actually pick it and harvest it? And, at the end of a hot day, you want a really tasty cocktail. You're going to go out there and you're going to harvest, some of those herbs and some of those funky fruits or roots or whatever. And you're going to stimulate you to actually go out and make sure you're taking in your bounty. That was part of my thought. And, every book has recipes on jams and jellies and stuff, come on. I mean, so just a twist.
Yes, it was great. It's really enjoyable. And, moving from herb spirals, one of the really fun sections of your book was on fungi or fungi. You actually do have a maple mushroom martini at the end of that chapter, which was a first for me to even look. Wow, that is really interesting. It's really fun.
It's like healthy alcohol. Yeah. I've been making a lot of meads from our honey. Using raw honey. And I actually just read a post. I think it was on Permies. Someone that had made reishi mead. And reishi is this very medicinal mushroom that people make teas out of, etc. And it is relatively easy actually to grow on logs yourself. So I'm like, reishi mead, that's awesome. So you're actually getting healthy alcohol out. It's like medicine that gets you high. I love it.
Yeah, it's fun. It's a whole new world.
Better stop there.
One part of your book I loved, like I said earlier, was the fungi section and growing specialty mushrooms at home, which is such a wonderful idea. Can you tell our listeners some of the benefits of growing your own mushrooms and the best types to grow? And we'll just get into that. That seems really accessible for people and fun and exciting.
I focus, and the chapter in the book focuses on outdoor mushroom cultivation using mostly woody substrates, logs, wood chips. They're perennial and they're very easy to grow, especially as compared, to doing an indoor operation where you've got sterilization, airflow issues, etc. Growing mushrooms outdoors can be very easy. And we're in the mid-Atlantic region, very humid area and quite shady. We have a lot of forest and trees. And so a lot of folks, a lot of clients, people always come to me and say, I've got this shady yard, I can't grow anything. And I'm like, yes, this is perfect for mushrooms. And I don't think folks realize, that it's a perennial. You get mushrooms year after year off of your logs, for a little bit of investment up front. The ones that we're most familiar with, shiitake, oyster mushrooms, we're familiar with them because they're quite easy to grow. They're quite easy to work with as a species. I grow both of those on wood logs. So imagine a log about 3 feet long by about 6 inches in diameter. This is wood that we thin out of our forests as sort of crowded saplings. So to help sort of quicken the regeneration of the forest, we can thin out these extra saplings, perfect size for mushroom wood. Around here, we've got a lot of maple, oak, and poplar. For the maple, the hard maples and the oaks, great for shiitake. Great. And poplars, great for oyster. Most trees can have some sort of fungi grown on them. Exceptions would be things like black walnut, black locust. But you'd be very surprised how many different species. Now, the trick is using healthy wood. You want to use healthy wood. You can't just go grab a piece of wood off the fire pile. That's not going to work. Fresh wood cut right now, end of winter. And then inoculated a couple weeks later, just as temperatures are getting into the 50s.
And why can't you use old firewood? What's the reason?
It's going to have ambient fungi already in it. There's fungi in the air. Chances are something has already landed on those logs and colonized it. And, it's already dominated that log. So by cutting your wood when it's dormant and then getting in there early in the spring with your inoculations of shiitake or oyster or reishi, you're assuring that your fungi, your species, is going to dominate that log and fruit the mushrooms you want. And then it's just a matter of keeping them moist. My favorite spot now is under our deck. Water falls through, but the wind is blocked from the house. I walk by it all the time. If we get a drought or something, I can easily spray it right there. And mushrooms pop out very quickly. So, they'll come out and then probably 36 hours have their full cycle. So you want to be where you can pass them, see them, and harvest them quickly. But put them under some evergreens. If you don't have anything, you could get a couple straw bales and a shade cloth and grow them right there on your patio. They are very versatile and very fun to work with. It's really exciting when a whole bunch of mushrooms pop out of your log. It's an exciting thing. And you get a lot at once. And your log can produce, depending on what type, if it's a nice thick oak or maple, it can go 5-8 years, flushing 2 times a year. You can force it and get 4 flushes a year of mushrooms. And if you want to take it all up a notch, you can actually make a pretty decent living growing mushrooms.
Yeah, they're quite expensive in the store.
Yeah, I mean, if you have near you marketing potential restaurants, farmers markets, you can get $15+ a pound.
So the mushrooms that you recommend growing at home are shiitake, and what were the other 2?
Oyster. Oysters are so easy. They're so forgiving, really tough. Reishi, I mentioned, grows as a very medicinal mushroom I like. Now, on wood chips, I like to grow Stropharia. Common name is wine cap, and also known as garden giant. And this is a really easy mushroom to grow. It grafts really well into the other aspects of your landscape in your garden. So what I do is I get wood chips delivered usually for free by a local arborist. I call them up. I'm like, hey, I'll save you a trip to the dump with your chips. Take them, dump them here. And as long as they're mostly mixed hardwoods, and not from like the side of the highway where there might have been, sprayed. They're perfect. And what I'll do is I'll create a patch. A minimum size would probably be 5 feet by 5 feet. I put down 2 inches. And if you want to start with your lawn, you can start with just, you put down some cardboard, put down 2 inches. And this works really well actually under deciduous trees. So under your apple tree, it could even be under your dogwood, your ornamental tree, doesn't matter. Put down 2 inches of wood chips. Then you want to sprinkle your spawn on that. And spawn is just a woody substrate. Think of it as kindling that has your fungi on it. So it has your variety. In this case, it's got the wine cap on it. Sprinkle that over your 2 inches. Throw down 2 more inches of wood chips. And ideally, the wood chips are moist. If they've just been chipped, they're still moist. But if not, you want to make sure that you're got a hose out there and you're keeping them moist as you sprinkle your spawn on. So put that next 2 inches on. Put another layer of spawn sprinkle on and mix it all up a little bit, and then cover it nicely with new straw, and you're done. And you've created a very productive fungi patch very easily. That will actually produce within the same year. If you do this in the spring, that'll start popping out wine caps in the fall. And then again, even more strongly the following year, they'll just be littered. I mean, hundreds of these mushrooms everywhere, and they're delicious. I mean, they're meaty and nutty and just very easy to grow. And you have to actually keep feeding them wood chips because they're consuming it and producing. But once they've gotten colonized really nicely, what I like to do is go out there in the middle of the summer is take a bucket full of those wood chips, which are covered in fungi now, and starting to break down. And I'll go out into my garden where my zucchinis and tomatoes are casting shade, and I'll dump these chips all around the base of the plants where there's that dappled shade that they like. And the fungi will jump off and into the organic matter and move around the soil and begin pulling in more nutrients for my tomatoes and my zucchinis. So they get pumped up. The plants are strong. They're more resistant to all the funky diseases we got. The fruit comes out larger and tastier, and then it starts to pop out mushrooms. So I'm going out there and harvesting, my dinner, making some pasta with some zucchini and tomato, and there's my mushrooms at the same time. So it's this awesome symbiotic relationship that stacks all these functions at once.
It really benefits soil fertility.
And I use them for cleaning up toxic runoff from rooftops. Here we are in suburbia. We got all these asphalt roofs. Hot summers, the rain comes off that, it comes down the gutter. What I like to do is create this very simple, it's like Paul Stamets does on a larger scale with his myco remediation. But I'll take these coffee burlap sacks I get from local roaster, and I'll stick a bunch of these wine cap chips in them, and I'll dig this little trench, maybe 10, 15 feet down from the downspouts coming off the roof. And I'll dig this trench and I'll put a couple sacks in there, and I'll cover it up, with chips so it's right back to lawn surface level. And then that water that's coming out of your downspout is coming and falling into that trench, and the fungi begin to eat and actually digest and turn those toxins into sugars. And then water that goes from there has been cleaned and purified. And so it's this awesome small scale micro remediation that we can do right on our home scale, off your driveway. If you've got an obvious place where your driveway is dumping off, some of the oil, petrochemicals from your cars and whatnot, the fungi will eat it.
Wow, that is incredible. And we should be inoculating fungi all over, like off the side of the freeways and everything.
Amen. And even if you just stuck burlap sacks with wood chips in them and didn't even worry about the wine cap, didn't even worry, about a certain type of fungi, the fungi will show up. Just get burlap sacks, stick them full of wood chips, and make sure that they stay, moist. I just cover mine with cardboard and then more wood chips. And so you're not even seeing it on the landscape. You can take your lawnmower right over it. Aesthetically, it's not impeding, and it's doing all this function at the same time. And then over time, as it breaks down, you could come along and then plant in that. If it's on the edge of your driveway, you could then plant in that, and it's going to be this rich, fertile soil that will grow up, this screen, and the roots and all the fungi in the soil will then do it long term for you.
Wow, so you're employing the fungi yes. to work for you. That's amazing. It's amazing that they actually can live and thrive and digest wood.
They're awesome.
Yeah, they they definitely are. Now, are there better mushrooms or fungi to use for the remediation of the water?
The terrestrial species like the wine cap is great. Oyster species also, they're very sort of aggressive, opportunistic, and they'll really colonize all different kinds of substrates, straw, pretty much anything that's organic matter. Oysters will really colonize quickly. But like I said, I wouldn't even worry too much about specifics if that's going to slow you down from getting out there and just, beginning to remediate some of this runoff. Just wood chips will bring them in. As you mentioned earlier, with the wood pile, there's ambient fungi. You create wood chips in a moist area, fungi are going to move in and they're going to do the work.
Now, if you say that you do have some oil or things that the runoff from your roof, you have the fungi there, you wouldn't want to eat those mushrooms that are actually.
You're going to ask that. You know what? I would.
Okay.
I would. As long as it's not heavy metals. If I was sure that there were no heavy metals in there, then I would have confidence that the fungi has eaten and used the toxins as food and converted it into sugar. Now, if metals can't be converted, so if you got lead or some kind of other metal runoff, the mushrooms will pull it up probably into its body, and then you could remove those and take them, and deal with them in another way. But I wouldn't eat those. But yeah, if it's just petrochemicals and stuff like that, I mean I'd eat them.
I love it. Okay, now, anything else you want to say about the fungi?
Oh God, I could talk forever about fungi, but no, just that it is great to pair with, and really, repairing our toxic, suburban lands, and very easily, very easily. You could even do it on larger scale in parking lots. If you have a parking lot, if you have a small business or a store, look at where that water is going at the end and maybe set up some burlap sacks and some kind of small system there. But you don't need to be a technician. You don't have to do it on a large scale. Just play with your downspout.
It's fabulous. I would love to move on now to another great chapter in your book. And my German friend is going to be shaking her head when she hears my pronunciation of this, but Hugelkultur. Could you tell our listeners what that is and why you're excited about that?
All right. Hugelkultur is basically mounded wood covered in soil. I mean, I think it's the oldest soil building technique on the planet. If you look at an older forest, you'll see that it's lumpy and it's got all these little humps and dips in it. And what that is the old trees that have fallen down and begin to biodegrade and get covered up with leaves and organic matter, and they're turning into soil. And you walk in those forests and they're like sponges, and you dig your hand into one of those lumps and it's just this rich humus. So it's just taking that observation and utilizing organic matter that's on our site. So here in suburbia, a lot of times you'll see people, cutting, limbs or trimming, and they'll drag it to the curb, and they'll, so the county can come pick it up or something. You're taking organic matter and biomass fertility off your land, and at the same time, someone next door is putting in a pool and excavating all this soil, and it's like, okay, here's a way we can imitate a very successful natural pattern right here in suburbia or wherever you are. Take that wood, take those trimmings, and really it can be any scale. If it's just small scale, that's fine, 1 or 2 feet. If that's what you got, that's great. You can go up to 6 feet high. By at least 6 feet wide, and there's benefits to going bigger in the sense that overall you're going to trap a lot more moisture. So make your pile, get that soil, get that sod, get the leaves, get some grass cuttings, whatever resources you have around you, and pile it on top of that wood. If you have sod, sort of flip it, grass side down, and then you want to cover it with at least a couple inches of soil, a little bit more if possible. And then, sort of cover that either with a cover crop, you can seed it, or cover it with straw and let it sit. Give it some time. A larger pile can take up to 3 years to really begin decomposing. And it's the same idea with the fungi. You've trapped moisture, fungi is moving into that wood, bacteria, and they're beginning to break it down and release nutrients, warmth, heat. So again, this is kind of a season extender in the early years of creating a hugelkultur. After about the third year, it's starting to hit stride, and you go out there and you plant into it, whatever you want. If it's a smaller scale, you might be one of your new beds for your annual gardens. A little bit larger, great place to go out there and start sticking in berry bushes, seed buckthorns, raspberries, gooseberries, whatever you have. And you stick that in there, and man, they have everything they need. They have all the nutrients they need. They have all the moisture that they need. They are just set because that is a big sink for moisture in the landscape, and all the decomposition in there just pumps your plants up.
Say that you're going to do this in your yard. How big are the mounds? It can be as big as you want it.
Yes. I mean, you have to.
You can't go overboard. You'll get kicked out of the neighborhood.
Right. Well, there's the aesthetics of it, but it drops very quickly. We built a medium-sized one in our food forest 3 years ago at about 5 feet. And here 3 years later, it's at 3 feet. That's a pretty fast drop. It really shrinks down. Now, our house building site, we're building a circular round wood straw bale house on our land. And we took down quite a few poplars that were, definitely going to hover over our house. Took all this wood with the bobcat, piled it up. I mean, huge. I mean, we went up to 6 feet tall. The bases were, about 6 feet wide, and these were running, 100 feet in ripples and catching the runoff from the site. So this is a typical pattern you see when someone's doing construction. They go in, they clear a lot, they drop a lot of trees, they take them away, and then, there's all this soil and all this runoff, and they put up these little fiber fences to try and catch it. What a great way to turn that around, use that wood, keep it on site, use it for the erosion control, and begin building these awesome growing beds for when you move in. So that was kind of the concept we were working with. But you need a lot of soil to cover a bed that big, I'm discovering. And there's a couple ways to do that. For us, as an edible landscape business, we're putting in rain gardens. So we're cutting out sod, we're digging out all this soil. So it's a great opportunity to sort of use that resource and flip it into the hugelkultur. But if you look around, you'll usually find someone digging up and having soil, and you can, recycle that and put it into your site.
It's very interesting. So you're looking at forest floors and recreating it in your own yard.
Yes. And where you have maybe a high water table, you've got really heavy soils, and it's you can just start right on top of the soil. You can start right on top if you have the soil that you can get from somewhere else to put on top, or you can stack your wood on contour or parallel to the slope and go uphill of that and dig out your swale right in front of the pile and throw that soil on the hugelkultur so that it becomes the basin. No, not the basin, the berm. So it becomes the berm of your swale, and that way you've created this multifunctional swale where the water's coming down, it's getting held in that basin you dug out, and you put the soil on the hugelkultur. And then you've kind of, combined your functions of building that soil with what you have right there at the same time as the swale.
That makes total sense. And then you're slowing the water, and that will reinvigorate, I would think, the soil life.
Yeah, you're sinking it. And then you're holding it right there in all that wood as well. It's not really going to escape from you. And then there's microclimates you can play with. If your hugelkultur is large enough, you could have a very strong south and north side. You put some of your cooler weather berries like lingonberries and gooseberries and things on your northern side. You can maximize that south side for figs and some of your more heat-loving berries. So there's a lot to play with.
So would you say then that in the hugelkultur soil that there's going to be a high rate or a large number of fungi as opposed to bacteria in the soil? And would you grow crops the ones that like fungi or no?
That's a great question. I would say it's going to keep changing, but your initial stages would probably be very fungi rich, which would lend them more toward, your trees and your perennial fruit culture. But I think down the road, as it breaks down further and further, it's going to go through its stages and potentially become more bacterial. But as long as you're cycling organic matter into it, that fungi will stay there.
So you can sit in your yard and drink your botanical booze and relax and look at your mounds and your... I love it. And your herb spiral.
Yeah,
I'm signing up. I like this way of life, Michael.
yeah, and I mean, and you're creating curves. You're making your landscape much more attractive. All of this comes together.
That's fantastic. So, anything else? I mean, we could talk for hours about your book because there's so many, just so people know, there's a whole, let's see, let me look. I have it right here. In the book, Michael Judd talks about food forests, uncommon fruits, earthen ovens, rainwater harvesting, swales, and rain gardens. So, there's a lot here. We just touched on the surface of it. Is there anything that we did not talk about that you would like to add?
Oh, wow. I could go on. I'm so excited about all of this. The uncommon fruits, I think, is a great part of the book in that it really shares very easy to grow fruits that thrive with neglect, that are tasty, and that you can really sort of value add into potentially, money making products, which I think if people really want to get away from the desk and they want to get back to working outside and making money at it, you can do it. And there's a real market niche for some of these sort of uncommon fruits and fungi and things like that. So I really encourage, more people to move away from the peaches and the nectarines and some of the plums, etc., which can be a challenge in certain parts of the country to grow, and really embrace some of the funky fruits.
I know some of the ones in your book that I thought were really interesting, the gooseberries and currants, jujubes,
Yeah,
mulberry, hardy kiwi was interesting. That was an interesting one.
yeah.
Sea berry, pawpaws that we'd mentioned earlier. Yeah, it's very unusual fruit. And the pawpaws, I guess one reason that we don't see those in stores is they don't ship well. Is that right?
They don't last long, no. 2 or 3 days once they've ripened. They're just their skin is not really conductive to travel. But you pull that pulp out, and the pulp is delicious. It's like custard apple. It's a relative of the custard apple.
Cherimoya, is it related to
Uh-huh.
cherimoya?
Cherimoya, custard apple, absolutely. And it has that tropical flavor and mix and lovely texture to it. But it freezes really well and is really great in ice cream. So you could get it, you could scoop it, put it in your freezer and then mix it in with your ice cream. It's fantastic.
So, Michael, when you look out at your property, your land, how many of the elements in your book do you see right there on your land?
Ooh, all of them. All of them for sure, and a whole lot more. But that's the great thing about having a little bit of land is you can really experiment and see what works, so that you really know what to share, whether it's with your clients or in a book, both in my case. But it's highly recommended, obviously, to experiment on yourself before others. But yeah, they're all in the landscape and all grafted together. I think a lot of times when you begin learning about permaculture, you get overwhelmed by all the multifunction and combining and designing that you learn about up front. I think any landscape design can be overwhelming if you begin trying to get everything together at one time. So the way I like to approach it with my workshops and with the book is like here, each chapter is a different project. Don't get overwhelmed about, how they all have to work together. Go out there and start, maybe build an herb spiral, maybe start a food forest patch. And over time, you will learn maybe that was better here, maybe it was better there. But just getting out there and starting to do it's the first and most important thing, and where you actually begin to learn. And then they all start to graft together. You start to fill all of your space. And it just does create its own harmony.
Well, everything looks really beautiful in the book with the herb spirals, even the fungi. It's just a really fun book. So it's Edible Landscaping with a Permaculture Twist by Michael Judd. And Michael, if people want to know where to get the book, how to contact you, can you give us that information?
Absolutely. The book is available. Chelsea Green is distributing the book. Of course, it's on the ever-present Amazon, but I would encourage and prefer people to buy the book from me, from our website, which is ecologiadesign.com, ECOLOGIA design. And those books come from me. I sign them, I ship them, they're coming directly from me, and that supports, me, the writer, more than the other avenues. But if Amazon's your thing, jump on there, get a book, and leave me a review, please. Putting the reviews out there is one of the few things we can do to create promotion for the book.
And did I actually hear the baby ninja in the background just then?
Yes, that's Wyatt Wizard. He's 6 months old. He's the future permaculture ninja. Yeah, he's a sweetheart. I'm excited. Can't wait for him to grow up. I'm like, come on, man, hurry up. I need some help.
Thank you so much for joining me today to talk about your new book, Edible Landscaping with a Permaculture Twist.
Great. Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to a Sustainable World Radio podcast. You can find us online at sustainableworldradio.com and also on iTunes. For more information about permaculture and ecology, visit the Sustainable World Media YouTube channel, where you'll find videos about permaculture, aquaponics, organic gardening, rainwater harvesting, and much, much more. Sustainable World Radio is a listener-supported program. If you like what we do, please consider making a donation to the show. I'm your host and producer, Jill Cloutier, and thank you so much for listening. Our first documentary, The Soil Solution, is now available at sustainableworldmedia.com. The Soil Solution is a 28-minute documentary film that explores the potential that healthy soil may hold in reversing climate change.